Okay, today I have the great opportunity to talk to somebody who I've met recently and spent a little time with. His name's Carl-Mikael Björk. He's a man from Sweden who many of you will know for his Cabinet of Curiosities video stream on YouTube. It's kind of a fascinating view on a person's interaction with the hardware and software of music making, as well as kind of the process and the details that it takes to be a creative musical artist. So I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to Carl. So I'll shut up now and talk to Carl. Hey, Carl, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? I'm really good. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
For the listeners, Carl and I had just gotten a chance to spend a little time together when we were at the Loop conference down in Los Angeles. We went out
That's
for a
right,
nice
yeah.
dinner and hung out and talked a little bit. He kind of clued me in on some camera things to consider and stuff like that. It was really great. For those of you who might not know a lot about his work, let's have him kind of talk to us a little bit about it. So, Carl, tell us, first of all, what is your current kind of artistic practice look like?
The artistic practice is really interesting because I just recently kind of switched my own mindset over from teacher at university to video content producer to actually call myself in some ways a musician. I just released an EP of older songs, or songs that are collected over time that I just recorded and released an EP. So in terms of what I want to do creatively, I want to write some new music and record some new music. But what I'm probably doing most publicly is the YouTube channel, which is making video tutorials, video narratives on electronic music, kind of weekly, if I manage. Yeah.
Right. Well, I noticed from looking at your feed, your channel, that you have like over 12,000 subscribers. It's really remarkable when you think of how it wasn't all that long ago that being an electronic musician was kind of an oddity. And it's really become something else now, you know?
Yeah, I guess it's really interesting. This basically all music is produced electronically, but electronic music where the electronics are like in the center and the focus, or like the center of attention, well, that's at least a scene that I guess has exploded. Or is that just because we're in the middle of it, so we think that everyone is doing it? I don't know, but yeah. But I think the interesting point in terms of YouTube subscribers in relation to like my work as a musician, I just talked to another creator about this who also does music and YouTube, how it's actually really much easier to get your video content out there in terms of tutorials and workflow videos and stuff, easier than getting your own music, your artistic work out there.
Right. Yeah, well, it's interesting though, because I think that you have found an interesting way to kind of weave your musical work with your tutorial video. And I think some of it is because in your tutorial videos, you refer often to your process in making your music, or at least you have recently, right? And so whether it's like making your own music video or talking about preparing a track for live performance or doing things, how you structured things for an EP release, stuff like that. You actually kind of weave your own work in with this kind of tutorial process in an interesting way.
True. And there's at least two reasons for that, because the one reason is that I myself, if I'm going to watch a tutorial video, I'd like it to be as authentic as possible. And while it's really hard to like come up with original music for every, at least for me, if you make videos weekly, it's really hard for me to like do like the composition part as well in parallel to the tutorial videos. So as a way of not making videos that I find boring or uninteresting, that are just, sounds, or this is the sound of an oscillator or whatever, I try to connect it to some sort of musical expression. But there's also the other part of like try and combine the YouTube video making with my own creative output. So if I'm going to manage that like time wise, I need to in some sort of way combine those two. So I actually make music for myself and then tell the story about that creative process.
I have to find a way to do that with my podcast. Maybe I need to do more like
Yes.
remixes of spoken word pieces or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you are most well known for, maybe with your channel, is your dedication to Elektron gear, right?
Yeah.
When did that start? What was like your first piece of Elektron gear?
I actually don't remember, but it was either the mono machine or the machine drum. I had them both at basically time of release. What's that? Early 2000s.
Right.
And when I talk about it now, I really don't understand how I could afford that back then. Young, just started to work as a preschool teacher. I don't know how I afforded those machines, but I saved up for them. I remembered reading reviews and Sound magazine, and since I'm not really a keyboard player, but I've been fascinated by electronic music instruments since I was a kid. But reading about those instruments, like with the integration of synthesis engine and sequencer, really spoke to me. So I purchased them and I cracked the logic of them. Then I gave up music for a while, and then when I started coming back to music, again, don't remember which one I got first, but either the Octatrack or the Analog 4, the Mark Ones, like what's that, 5-6 years ago or something. Yeah, so I like their instruments. I think that combined workflow of sequencing, modulation, and synthesis or sampling, like as a whole, is really interesting to me, and it kind of pushes my creative output.
Yeah, and to what extent do you think that focusing on Elektron was also kind of key to your success with your YouTube channel?
I haven't really thought about that, but in hindsight, it's quite probable because I started making videos about 3.5 years ago. And I think Elektron has really blown up as a company during that time as well. So yeah, probably being fairly early doing Elektron tutorials while they've been growing and getting an expanded user base has probably been beneficial to me, I guess. Or maybe I've been beneficial to them. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe so. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that you share sort of a home country with the Elektron tribe there.
Yeah, true.
In that
true.
you are based out of Sweden, right?
Yep, correct.
What city are you in?
I'm in Malmö, all the way down south, and Elektron are in Gothenburg, about 3 hours with car from me. So one fourth up in Sweden, quarter north in Sweden.
I see. So if you have to go shout at them, you can drive up there, stand outside the building, and like scream. Right?
I could do that. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I may have you do that for me at some point.
Yeah. Of course, I'll do it.
So I'm always curious with people who have grown up in really different environments from me. I'm curious what it is that drove you to become the artist that you are. What was your background? What was growing up like? What was school like? Who were the people that influenced you? I'm always really curious about that story, but especially for me, Sweden is just about as foreign as it gets. I've never been there. I don't know much about it. And so I'm really curious how you developed as an artist and what that environment did to help you become who you are.
That's really interesting going back. And I don't think I've ever put something just sprung to mind when you asked the question. I've never really started there, but I had a teacher in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade who was really into, he was a folk dancer and an accordion player. So we had a lot of music in school, not music that I appreciated, but there was a lot of music in school those years. But he was also really, really open to our ideas and creativity and technology. And I can remember I had Commodore 128, like one of those early home computers.
Right.
And he was really, well, bring your stuff to school. We can try and program stuff. Maybe you can make music on the computer and I can play. So he was really pushing that sense. And I never really thought about it that way, but that might have been one factor. And I was really fascinated by electronic instruments and synths, listening to Depeche Mode from like just about that age. So really fascinated in the synthesizer as an instrument. Never really got to play one until much later, but that was that. And then creatively, like in high school, we have a little bit of a different system than in the US, where you pick like an electable program that varies between two, or at that time varied between 2 and 3 years. And I picked a program that was called like graphic design and store decorations. So if like some sort of commercial creative aesthetic education.
Okay.
And at that time I was doing photography, so I've always been interested in the creative arts. Thought I was going to work with photography or graphic design. Never got to that. And right after high school, I worked as a swimming instructor for kids. And I realized that I really appreciated teaching or leading groups. So I went to college or university to become a preschool teacher and then a drama teacher. And then that's been like my line of creativity. And parallel with that, I learned to play the guitar at that teacher education program. So I never did the whole music thing when I was a kid, really. So learned to play guitar. And then when I actually got a job and could afford buying actual synthesizers, I started buying my first synths like in my 20s, and realized that the PC I already had could actually do multi-track recordings, which I didn't know. That was more of like a coincidence that my creative sound blasters, the sound cards.
Yeah, the Creative Labs Sound Blaster.
Yeah, Creative Labs. That's right, the sound blaster, and that could actually do audio recording. So at that point, like, what was that? I was in my like early 90s. I started to discover how electronic music suddenly got like affordable and possible to do. So I had a couple of years there, and then I quit it for a while because I got some performance anxiety. In terms of all those possibilities that also comes with like a DAW, and that everything is potentially a finished produced track and stuff like that. So I quit for a bit, and then I got back into electronic music a couple of years back. But I think that being a teacher, first in preschool and then on university, teaching at the teacher training program since almost 18 years back now, that has been also a creative outlet. And I've been working with drama with the students, and doing my own music on the side.
It's very interesting. Well, and it also, I have to say that it's kind of interesting hearing that background and imagining how this kind of all folds together to become the Carl-Mikael that we all know and love, right?
Yeah.
Because, I would say that, first of all, when anyone who's interacted with your video channel knows that your visual work is beautiful and compelling. You have a really good eye.
Thanks.
And you do a great job of production. So clearly that background and that graphical training and design/styling comes to play in that. You do a great job of teaching and laying out material in a way that's understandable. So all of that, like teaching and learning how to teach background comes into play. And even the drama thing. I mean, the way that you present material, you use a lot of kind of like dramatic flourishes that really kind of help seal in certain points, which is, a very important teaching technique as well. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to see where all of these pieces of the puzzle came from. It's almost like if you wanted to design what you are now, you would have to go back 20 years and do all that stuff over.
Yes, and in terms of my formal education and my degree, I didn't end up in like the commercial world of photography or advertising or graphic design, and I'm not really working as a preschool teacher anymore, but I really wouldn't want to be without those studies, because they really shaped where I'm at today. And also when I started making YouTube videos, I didn't have the idea that I actually think kids might. I met a couple of kids doing work this week, and we were talking about what would you like to be when you grow up, and they said, "Oh, I want to be a YouTuber." It's really interesting how kids actually,
Right.
10-year-old kids, see that as a like some sort of occupation
A
and not,
career. Yeah.
yeah, career, yeah, and it's not in any sense making that kind of income so I could live off of it, but that they're seeing that I didn't do then, but in terms of how, as you say, everything melts together, like photography turned into cinematography. I have a large use of what I know, like learning to take pictures with analog film and knowing how to work camera. When I realized that that's transferable to using like the DSLR for video work, that was
Right.
really, wow, now I can combine like doing graphics and dabbling in motion graphics with like my teaching style and also doing music to that. So in a sense, going back to your first question, well, making video is for me combining several of those interests and skills that I've been developing, and I find it really pleasurable. Is that a word? Yeah,
Yeah.
really fulfilling. Yeah,
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting because I would say, in looking at your video work, that it does seem like artwork in its own right. It goes beyond the kind of sit down at the camera and do something straightforward. Again, sort of like the performance that you bring to it, the way that you narrate through whatever story that you're trying to tell. It is in very many ways, it's very much a performative kind of process that
yeah,
you have to go
right,
through in
yeah.
order to make those videos.
Yes, and it's also in a sense, an exploration for my own fulfilling. Because a lot of the times I think, oh, I should just settle on one lighting setup and one framing of whenever I shoot, like overhead shots or when I do talking head. But I find it so interesting to keep on exploring the video media itself. That sense of, aesthetic exploration is really important to me, and that also keeps me going.
Sure, sure, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you a little. Well, before we go, I have questions about your some of this background stuff. One of the things I'm
Yeah,
curious about is this transition from kind of dropping things and then eventually learning some guitar in university to
yeah.
all of a sudden starting to pick up synthesizers and starting to play in electronic music. I mean, you're one of the people that's going to be able to, very clearly remember the point at which you went from not doing electronic music and then all of a sudden you are doing electronic music, right?
Yeah.
What was sort of like the tipping point? What was the thing? Was it just like getting a job where you had enough money that you could buy something? Or was it
Mm.
finding yourself in a position where you had the time to do it? Or was there somebody that was like doing electronic music and you said, "Oh, I would like to be like that"? What was
Yeah.
the thing that kind of like tipped you into it?
The thing is, going back to those Commodore 128 days and possibly the Amiga 500 after that, I was like exploring the synthesis capabilities of those machines, and I remember like programming really simple drum machines or drum computers, like in BASIC, I guess, on the Commodore 128. So stuff like, I've been interested in that. And I had a really simple keyboard when I was a kid. So I had been like dabbling with actually playing keys, although not formally trained. So I actually think that sometimes in my 20s, I guess, when I had that PC computer and realized that I could actually record music with it. And I'm not sure this is right, but I think I remember I bought a used synth, like a Korg DW 6000, something like that. A
Sure.
really, now I don't.
Elementary unit. Yeah, right.
Yes. So I bought that used and I played some stuff, and I could probably hook it up with MIDI and get like the general MIDI sound set of that Creative Labs card to actually do some stuff in, I think, Cakewalk or something early was that I worked with. So then I realized I've always had a home computer because my dad worked with computers. So now that machine was a possible studio. So I think that was the entry point. And
Oh,
then a
okay.
few years into actually having a job, I could buy proper instruments and explore like electronic music since, and also recording songs. So I think it kind of grew there. And in terms of, I had played like the keyboard when I was a kid, even though not schooled, didn't really know anything. But during those college years where we learned basically three chords, but knowing those three chords and being able to sing songs with the kids, really, that's a huge, like, an experience for me, that, oh, this is how music works. These chords are like the foundations of the songs I sing with the kids. And then transferring that knowledge of chords and melodies to making music with electronic instruments that I had been fascinated by since I was a kid. I think, yeah, so an escalating tipping point around my 20s or something like that.
Right. But you didn't have any other musical training other than a few guitar chords?
No, no. I don't know if there's anything similar in the US, but we have a pretty formal, like, communal state funded music school, which is in like second and third grade, basically.
Okay.
But when I was a kid in the 80s, you had to start by playing the recorder.
Yeah.
And I just, even like the 8-year-old Carl-Mikael, really, I no, there's no way you'll put me through 2 years of that only so I could play a guitar later on. No, so I refused. But now I'm seeing that a lot of my peers that actually did that, they know
Right.
how to read music and they
Sure.
understand concepts of it. That now I'm a little bit jealous of it, but it might very well be that would have killed also my interest in music. So, but
Right.
I totally ditched that. A free music education available to anyone in Sweden, but no, I didn't want to take part.
You had to walk away. Yeah,
No.
right. Isn't that
No,
isn't that funny how oftentimes the things that we think are the most useless are the things that we later on realize
Yeah.
could have been the most valuable, right?
yeah, because now sometimes I get like, what do you say, like a minority complex in relation
Oh,
to people who actually know music theory.
sure.
Because I want to be able to speak music and communicate music like formally, because I have this idea that would help me in some sense.
Right. Well, this actually brings me to my next question, because you mentioned something that is actually really close to my heart, which is when you said that you actually quit for a while because you were experiencing a kind of performance anxiety.
Yeah, yeah,
And I went through something similar. Mine was related to literally performing in front of people and
yeah.
kind of like freaking out. But I know other people who have performance anxiety when the record button gets pressed, for example,
Okay, yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever. How,
yeah.
first of all, what was the kind of the nature of your performance anxiety? And what do you think it was that actually triggered the problem?
I think that the nature of it was that as soon as I had hardware instruments, but also back then, and that must have been like second half of the 90s or early 2000s, even then everything was kind of centered around that DAW. So as soon as I switched on my synths, I also switched on my sequencer, my computer, to actually sequence them and stuff. And by doing that, there was a possible track as in a recorded production. So there was never, or there was, I did make music for a couple of years, but the thing of kind of taking care of that sensation, that now when I sit down and start exploring these sounds or sequences or riffs or whatever, they could be a song. So there was not enough of being in the moment and in the now and just playing for pure joy, which I think you might do to a larger extent if you're playing an acoustic instrument, like playing a acoustic guitar sitting on your couch. There's not this, oh, I need to record this because it could be a, but I think that's kind of connected to, it's kind of connected to how we make electronic music. And so that kind of killed it for me, that, ooh, I should produce something. So
Right.
not in it for actually just doing it, enjoying the music for me, myself, then and there. And I think that I can see traces of that still, not so much in myself, since I'm so conscious about it nowadays, but on Facebook and web forums, there's a lot of talk about gear, and it's not super rare that someone asks, "Well, you have all this gear. Show me your SoundCloud."
Right. And everyone clams up right away, right?
Yeah, and I think, well, it's fine. I do make electronic music, but I rarely record it, and I
Right.
think that must be, or must have, every large value as it has if you're playing an acoustic guitar. But it's so connected. If you're making electronic music, you are also recording and releasing tracks, so not so much for yourself.
Yeah, well, that's actually a really interesting point, because if you think about it, electronic music is just about the only kind of music where you don't have to practice some sort of like physical dexterity in order to be a good player, right?
Yeah, you could get away without doing it. Yeah, sure.
Right. I mean, it helps to learn like the keyboard shortcuts or how to play a keyboard or how to whack a MPC or something, but
Yeah.
an awful lot of it is more of an intellectual exercise and an oral exercise than it is a physical one. And so, the question is there sort of the equivalent of sitting on your sofa? Because if you think about what you're doing when you're sitting on a sofa playing with the guitar, you're kind of working on the physical activity of playing a guitar, which has value, right?
Yeah.
When there's nothing like that in the electronic music world, not really.
No, I guess.
I don't know. I do that with my MPC. I sit down, now that they're battery powered, I'll sit down and I'll just bang away with it just to practice the process of playing,
Yeah. And I think they're like the Elektron boxes, or like groove boxes, like the MPC that you're saying, and like the OP1 and the OPZ, they're really meant to be that. And I also think that even if you can't be on your sofa, like just noodling with the modular,
right?
So if you're not recording that, which you don't have to, then it's really, this is just here and now. I can never reproduce this again. This is for me and my own enjoyment right now, for exploring sounds, melodies, harmonies, whatever.
Sure.
So that might be the equivalent.
Although, if you think about it, the modular is probably more like a guitar than the software for one reason, which is if plugging this jack into this other jack produces a sound, the next time you need that sound, you physically will kind of know where things go, right?
Yeah.
And so you're kind of working on the physical facility of dealing with that, I guess. Yeah, again, none of it is like playing a clarinet, I guess. But one of the things I think we hear from a lot of people is that when they talk about working with a DAW, there's this discussion of, I can do everything on a DAW.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes what people really want is a situation where they have to say, I can only do a few things, so I'm going to focus on doing those things. Right. Yeah. And that actually ends up feeling somehow very calming and relaxing.
Yeah. And I think that there are like endless possibilities working with the computer or DAW. And when I started getting back and I rebought some instruments and started getting into music again, I consciously bought hardware instruments that would work as standalones, like the Elektrons.
Right.
And I kind of decided, I've actually owned a copy or a license of Ableton Live since version 4 or something. I never got rid of that. Might have not been installed at some times, but even though when I got back into music, I also decided that Ableton Live is not my instrument. It's not my point of focus. It's a recorder, not as in the flute, but something.
It's a production tool, right?
Yeah. Yes, and as such, I think it does things really, not only Ableton Live, but DAWs in general. It really, for me, I like compositions quite traditional with like chorus, verse, chorus. And at that point, I think the DAW is really, really great to structure music over time. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think that tool is really, really useful. And so in a sense, yes, I do a lot of hardware instruments, but I'm kind of allergic to people doing the whole DAWless thing.
Right.
Which is, it's too dogmatic for me.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I think that feelings about that ebb and flow, right? I think when things get too focused on computers, then people have a backlash and they want to
Yeah,
become
sure. Yeah,
dogmatic
yeah,
about
yeah,
hardware.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
seems like very seldom do we settle in a good hybrid spot. But it kind of seems like now is kind of a good time for that, right?
Yeah. And I really, again, I definitely appreciate hardware, but when it comes to recording, I do not want to record to mini disc or ADAT or an old tape recorder because that's just too cumbersome.
Yeah,
The computer is so much better at doing that.
right.
But on the other hand, if you want to download every free plugin or even just use all the plugins and content that come with live, you can do everything with that. But it's also really easy to get lost in those
Hmm.
like opportunities. Uh,
Yeah, I'll never forget one time I was going to collaborate with somebody on a project, and so I went over to his place, and he was working on putting an old analog drum machine into the system, and we had planned on spending an entire day together, and he actually spent the entire day actually trying out all the different compressor plugins that he had
yeah, I know.
to be which one would sound the best on a drum machine. I was like, in the end, I was like, well, you know what? What we actually have is we have the worst possible sounding compressor because we've got no sound that was recorded. So how did that work out? You know?
Yeah, yeah. And it's really easy to start in the wrong end because you want to get I want to get a really punchy kick drum.
Right,
Well,
right.
maybe that's not step number one.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm
Yeah,
curious a little bit about this idea of using, you talk about the DAW really opens up structure, but if you primarily do your writing and in a lot of your work with hardware, I'm wondering
yeah,
what is the process that you go to in terms, especially when you say that you tend to write music that's structured kind of traditionally with verse,
yeah,
choruses, breaks, intros, outros, and
yeah,
some of your videos are also kind of speak to this. The thing is, a lot of times hardware isn't really set up to do a great job or at least an obvious job of doing songs that are structured in kind of a traditional mode. What are some of the tricks that you use in order to make things kind of make hardware fit the way that you think about music?
for the EP I recorded, there were 4 songs on the EP, and 3 of the songs actually started as uh, lyrics. And usually, my writing process is that I write one section or one part of the lyrics, and then I try to find some sort of form or pattern or a narrative in that part, and I try to recreate it with different lyrics. So the lyrics have been for 3 of those 4 songs, they have been number one. And then I sit down and I try out chord progressions on acoustic guitar uh, with those lyrics and trying to come up with a melody on top of it. So uh,
Okay.
lyrics first, then chords and melody, and like one unified process. So usually the songs are written acoustically before I start making them in like an electronic production.
That's really
Um,
interesting. I mean, that's about as old school as it comes. You could go to Nashville and write country tunes like that.
yeah, yeah, because I know when we talked in Los Angeles, we briefly touched upon how does like Elektron instruments with their basically 64 step architecture fit with like writing songs with
Right.
verse, chorus, verse over several bars. Um, but the thing I've been doing is like from that acoustic song structure, I often start with the analog 4, making kind of, which is like a, for those who don't know, is a quadruple monophonic subtractive synthesizer. Like, yeah, four monophonic synthesizers in one groove box with a
Right. Right.
sequencer. So I make like kind of rhythmic harmonic parts, kind of baseline arpeggio type patterns that works with the harmonic progression in the song I've done. And there are 64 steps, but you could evolve that with different trickery to be like far longer than just implied 4 bars. So you could
Right.
easily do like 8 or 16 bars by having doing the tempo in half and stuff like that. So then I make those parts, and actually for the EP, now the recording I did was actually based upon a live set where the analog 4 and rhythm, the analog rhythm, the drum machine was in focus. So I had arranged these songs for live performance. And then having done that and rehearsed so much, I realized, well, if I record like a basic structure, basically live in studio with the analog 4 and rhythm and singing, then I have like, this is the spine of the song. And then I could add other parts to that. And I can also edit the sound files from the Elektron groove boxes and add like pianos and guitars that I did. And
Interesting.
that really
Wow.
helped me. Also, just having that, I can perform this song in a take. I didn't necessarily do that for the recording, but basically I had like the spine or like a skeleton.
Sure. Right.
The fourth song, well, which is the first song on the EP, but that was written. I did to push myself in a creative direction. I set up like a 60-second song challenge for myself about a year ago, where I decided I'm going to make a 60-second song every week, and I only managed 3 weeks, but still, this is one of the songs. Yeah. But the thing was, I didn't just want to make like an 8-bar pattern or whatever.
Right.
I actually wanted to, within those 60 seconds, I wanted some sort of progression. I wanted lyrics because I wanted to push myself in that direction, and I wanted some sort of like harmonic contrast. So that particular song was made like with the analog rhythm and the modular making some sort of quirky bass line that I then edited in Ableton Live, and then just sang and improvised something over. And those 60 or like 59 seconds, because I kept within the limits. I thought, but there's an intro within a 60-second. There's an intro and there's a part A and a part B, and I also make time signature change
Oh,
from
right.
4/4 to 6/8. So I
Yeah.
think, wow, this is a really dense arrangement that possibly deserves to get some more time than 59 seconds.
It was your version of prog rock, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But that was also an interesting way of writing, to actually get a sketch down in a really limited, or like with a set of rules. And also that, well, you don't have to make a 5-minute pop song. Get all this in 60 seconds and you're done. But so I managed to create like all the necessary parts. So I think that way of writing was also interesting. Because when I'm playing guitar, like from the limited knowledge I have, I know, well, if I play this key, these chords fit well, and it's interesting if I do this switch ups and whatever, and then the melodies come on top of that. But if I compose on like the modular or even one of the Elektron boxes, not being so aware of what key or chords I'm actually using, the harmonies and progressions might be more untraditional because I don't know what I'm doing.
Right. Right.
So I think, in a sense, I would like to explore that more to get something interesting going that I don't really know what it is, and then try to add like a melody and lyrics on top of that.
You mentioned the modular there. What on your channel, mostly we see your interaction with Elektron boxes and some Arturia gear. What other
Yeah,
gear do you have in your studio that gets a fair amount of use?
I have a fair amount of Eurorack modules, and well, in comparison to what? Well, I have like 2 tip-top Mantis cases. So what
Okay.
is that? 4 rows of 104U or something,
Right.
which it's a fairly large system. They get some use, but actually just a couple of weeks ago, I decided that I need to trim that down because, again, it's in relation to what I want to do in terms of music, that mostly gets me noodling, which
Yeah.
might work as some sort of starter. But now I rearranged, so I have one case, and that case is a dual oscillator bass voice, and then there's a kick drum, and there's another percussion module, and like the 3 of them are acting together with a delay and reverb module. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, this is drum and bass, not as a
Right.
genre, but as a an
As a
instrumentation,
tool, right? Yeah.
as a tool. And I've only had for this way for like 2 weeks or something, but it's patched. It's not. I don't want to repatch it. It's set up to work this way, and if I go here,
Right.
I'll add a tempo synced LFO to the frequency of the filter, so I know what it's doing. So that gets some use, but mostly it's the Elektron boxes, piano, and guitar. And I have an acoustic piano in my well, it's my wife's piano that's moved into my studio. Very convenient, and I'm very happy about that. An old, very nice upright piano, so
Nice.
that's really good. That's about it. I do like the also Swedish synth makers, the Nord modulars. I've had those in different incarnations, and now I have a Nord G2 that I conceptually really love, but unfortunately find that I'm not using enough, because you need to hook it up to your computer,
Right.
you need to run the editor.
Kind of an ordeal.
The editor is really great, but it's kind of dated, and they haven't updated it since forever. But I've learned so much about synthesis through those Nord modulars, and they were so in the forefront. If you look at are you familiar with the Nord modular editors?
Yeah, I am.
So if you're looking at them compared to what Eurorack or modular looks like today,
right?
And they made that software way before the Eurorack scene. Of course, it was modular, right, but that was taking off. But it's too bad they don't do synths anymore. They just do like stage pianos and stuff.
And organs, right? I know, it's so odd.
Yeah.
It's really weird. Well, Carl, I'll tell you, I have a bunch of stuff I wanted to ask you more about your thinking behind the way that you teach. I wanted to talk more about this idea of using your modular for therapy, which it sounds like like you fall into that as easily as I do.
Yeah.
But I really only have time for one more question, so I'm gonna lay it out.
Pick your favorite.
I will pick my favorite, which is, what is the next thing that we're going to see from you? So you do some video work where you do tutorials and working with hardware. You do some where you talk about songwriting or song production. What's the next thing that you're going to want to tackle?
Well, in terms of in relation to what we talked about before, for my own creative output, I have written a bunch of I've written a bunch of lyrics for songs. So what I want to do is start making songs out of those lyrics, and to be able to make videos and make my own music, I need to combine those two. So my plan is to let the viewer in a tutorial workflow type of way of how I'm approaching that writing process using Elektron gear, modular stuff, but also in terms of how I approach storytelling and narratives in my lyrics. And creativity in general, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's probably where my videos will be heading.
That's actually really great, because bringing in more lyrical content into electronic music, I mean, with your love of Depeche Mode, it makes an awful lot of sense for you to try and, for you to have that be a part of the practice. I like the sound of it. So this EP, what is the name of the EP and where could people get it?
The EP is called AKA Birch Little, and it's on Spotify and iTunes, and I think a bunch of other streaming services. It's also on Bandcamp, and there are actually a couple of limited edition cassette tapes available through Bandcamp as well.
Excellent. And for your channel, you also do support via Patreon, right?
Yeah, I do Patreon. I have a bunch of beautiful people that believe enough in my creative output to support me through Patreon. Yeah.
So for people that want to check out your YouTube channel, where would they find that?
I think that the easiest way would be to just, in the YouTube search for Carl-Mikael's Cabinet of Curiosities, and usually Cabinet of Curiosities, possibly together with Elektron,
right.
will get you there.
Okay.
I haven't managed to get a really short URL, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. Carl, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to have this chat. It was really great.
Pleasure. Thank you, Darwin.
Okay, and with that, I am going to let you head out. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. Many thanks to Carl for the chat, for the opportunity to get caught up. He and I had a great time when we met at Loop, and we had a great time during this talk as well, so many thanks to him. Make sure you check out the show notes for links to his YouTube channel and other stuff. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for again sticking with me through all of these many podcasts. We've done a lot together, and I really appreciate you guys always sticking with me. Do me a favor, reach out, get friends, family, even people you dislike. At least tell them about the show before you take a swing at them. One way or another, I do appreciate all your help, and we will catch you next time around. Bye.